The air around Atlanta feels heavier tonight, and it is not because of the summer heat. It is because a secret that was supposed to stay locked away has exploded into the open, and the shockwaves are ripping through one of love and hip-hop's most famous couples. Kirk Frost thought he could escape the whispers with a quiet vacation far from the cameras, but the internet has other plans. Fans are already calling this the most jaw-dropping scandal of the year after a mysterious DNA test surfaced online, claiming to reveal a baby that nobody was supposed to know about. The leak appeared on a private forum late last night and spread like wildfire, with screenshots racing across social media faster than anyone could delete them. By sunrise, the Frost family name was trending in every corner of the country. Witnesses say Rashida was blindsided when the results hit her phone. One friend describes her reaction as pure heartbreak, saying she collapsed into tears before she could even finish reading the message. Cameras have yet to capture her side of the story, but insiders report she stormed out of the couple's boutique in Buckhead, refusing to answer calls from Kirk or anyone else. Meanwhile, Kirk was spotted arriving back in Atlanta looking pale and restless, refusing to address reporters who shouted questions about the rumored baby. His silence is only fueling the fire. Fans are desperate for answers. Who is the mysterious woman said to have traveled with Kirk during that secret vacation? Is the child really his, or is someone setting him up? And how did private DNA results leak when only a handful of people even knew the test existed? As the pieces of this puzzle begin to fit together, one thing is certain: the calm surface of Kirk and Rashida's marriage has been shattered, and the truth that waits beneath could change everything. The morning after the leak, Atlanta woke to a storm of whispers that would not fade. Rashida's phone kept buzzing with calls from family, friends, and business partners who all claimed to be checking in, but every voice carried the same unspoken question. She sat in the corner of her boutique office, staring at the glowing screen, the DNA screenshot still open like a wound. The numbers were clear, the words impossible to ignore. 99.9%. Her chest felt heavy, as if the letters themselves had weight. She tried to breathe, but each inhale only sharpened the thought that Kirk had once again dragged her into a headline that felt like a nightmare. Outside, the early customers browsing racks of clothing had no idea that the woman behind the glass door was watching her marriage fracture in real time. Kirk was still at the airport when the first paparazzi photos hit the blogs. Cameras caught him wearing a black hoodie pulled low over his eyes, jaw tight, phone clutched to his ear. An eyewitness told reporters that he muttered a single sentence into the receiver before climbing into a waiting SUV. "Tell her I'm coming home." No one knew who he was speaking to, but the message only deepened the mystery. If the baby wasn't his, why rush back in silence? And if it was, what explanation could possibly make the leak any less explosive? Fans refreshed their feeds by the minute, dissecting every grainy image, every shadow that might hint at a hidden companion. One user claimed they spotted a woman in the background of a photo carrying a stroller. Others swore it was an old picture. The debate only fueled the frenzy. Meanwhile, Rashida's mother, Ms. Shirlene, was not holding back. She arrived at the boutique mid-morning, eyes flashing with the kind of fury only a mother can summon. "I told you this man would bring nothing but chaos," she said the moment she stepped inside, her voice carrying over the quiet hum of the air conditioning. "You let him take that vacation and now look what we got. A baby, a leaked test. Girl, this is beyond foolishness." Rashida wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Mama, I don't even know if it's real." Ms. Shirlene folded her arms. "Real or not, the world believes it. And that man of yours is out there hiding while you sit here crying. You need answers before the streets write your story for you." By midday, the couple's oldest son had started receiving messages from classmates asking if he had a new sibling. He texted his mother in panic, begging her to tell him what was happening. Rashida's heart broke as she typed back a vague reassurance, promising to explain later. The drama was no longer confined to gossip sites. It had invaded their home, their children's school, every corner of their lives. Producers from Love and Hip Hop called repeatedly, offering to send a camera crew to capture the moment. Rashida refused every time. "This is not a storyline," she snapped at the third caller before hanging up. But deep down, she knew the network would not stay away for long. Scandal sells, and this was a goldmine. Kirk finally reached the house just before sunset. The driveway filled with flashing lights as photographers swarmed, shouting questions that cut through the thick evening air. "Is the baby yours? Who leaked the test? Did you cheat on Rashida again?" Kirk kept his head down, pushing past the chaos with a clenched jaw. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Rashida stood at the base of the staircase, arms crossed, eyes red but steady. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Kirk exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I needed time to think. She stepped closer. Think about what? About how to explain a child you never told me about. He raised his hands in surrender. It's not what you think. The words sounded rehearsed, and Rashida's anger flared. That's exactly what you said the last time, Kirk. Do you realize what this is doing to our kids? To me, a DNA test doesn't just leak out of thin air. Kirk shook his head. I don't know who leaked it, but that test is not even official. Someone's trying to set me up. Rashida narrowed her eyes. Then who's the mother? Who's the woman you were with on that trip? Silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. Kirk finally muttered. I went to Miami to clear my head, that's all. There was no woman. I don't know why someone is doing this. Before Rashida could respond, Ms. Shirlene entered the room like a thunderclap. Boy, you better stop lying to my daughter before I drag the truth out of you myself. Kirk's shoulders stiffened, but he kept his gaze on Rashida. I swear on everything. I didn't father a child. The room filled with the sound of Rashida's shaky breath. She wanted to believe him, but the image of that DNA report burned behind her eyelids. 99.9%. Those numbers did not lie. Or did they? She thought of the countless stories of fake tests, of forged papers. Could someone really go to such lengths to destroy their marriage? And if so, who? Outside, fans continued to swarm social media. Some defended Rashida, praising her strength. Others accused her of ignoring obvious red flags. A few conspiracy theorists even claimed the leak was a publicity stunt for the new season of the show. Each theory added another layer to the chaos, making it impossible to separate truth from rumor. Bloggers camped outside the Frost home, live streaming every flicker of movement behind the curtains. The family was trapped in a fishbowl, every glance and gesture broadcast to millions. As night fell, Rashida retreated to the master bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through messages from friends and strangers alike. Some offered support, others demanded answers. A few hurled cruel accusations. Her heart pounded as she opened an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." Inside was a blurry photo of Kirk at an airport lounge, sitting beside a woman with long curly hair. The woman's face was partially hidden by a hat, but a small child could be seen sleeping in a carrier at her feet. The email contained no explanation. Only the photo and a single sentence. Ask him about Miami. Rashida's hands trembled as she stared at the image. Was this the proof everyone was waiting for? Or just another cruel trick? She forwarded the email to Kirk without a message and waited. Minutes passed with no reply. Downstairs, she could hear the faint sound of his phone buzzing. He was ignoring her. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "Why? Does this always happen?" The weight of years of betrayal settled on her shoulders like a familiar, unwelcome coat. Kirk, alone in the living room, finally saw the email. His heart dropped at the sight of the photo. He recognized the woman immediately. Her name was Tasha, a promoter he had worked with on several events years ago. She had reached out during his vacation claiming to have business opportunities in Miami. They had met briefly at the airport. Nothing more. But the picture told a different story. One the world was ready to believe. Kirk clenched his fists, realizing how perfectly the trap had been set. Someone had been following him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Kirk paced the length of the living room, phone in hand, fighting the urge to call Tasha. If he reached out, it could look like coordination, like guilt, but if he stayed silent, the photo would speak for itself. The walls seemed to close in as the faint sound of Rashida moving upstairs reminded him of the damage already done. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a countdown. He finally dialed a number, his voice low when the line connected. "I need to know if you're behind this," he said, not even waiting for a greeting. The voice on the other end hesitated before answering. "Kirk, I don't know what you're talking about." He pressed on, his words sharp. "Don't play with me. Someone leaked a DNA test and now there's a picture of us at the airport. Tell me you didn't sell that to the blogs." The silence that followed was unbearable until Tasha finally said, "I swear, I haven't spoken to anyone, but I did see a man taking pictures of us that day. I thought he was just a fan." Kirk's stomach twisted. A stranger with a camera could mean a paparazzo or something worse. He hung up without another word, dread pooling in his chest. Upstairs, Rashida stared at the same photo on her phone, replaying every trip, every late-night call, every unexplained absence. Memories she had tried to bury resurfaced with cruel clarity. She thought of the last scandal, the pain of forgiving him, and how she had promised herself never to endure it again. Her heart wanted to believe his innocence, but the evidence felt relentless. The image of the sleeping child gnawed at her resolve. Ms. Shirlene knocked softly on the bedroom door before stepping inside. She carried a mug of tea, but her expression was unyielding. Baby, you can't sit here waiting for him to tell you the truth. Men like Kirk don't confess until they're caught red-handed. Rashida wiped at her eyes. Mama, I don't even know what's true anymore. Ms. Shirlene set the mug on the nightstand and sat beside her. Then you go find out. Hire a lawyer. Get your own test, whatever it takes. Don't let the internet decide your marriage. Her voice softened. But don't lose yourself in this mess. You've built too much to let him drag you down. While mother and daughter plotted their next move, social media lit up with a new twist. A celebrity gossip account posted what it claimed were text messages between Kirk and an unidentified woman. The messages, filled with coded language and late-night meetup requests, sent fans into a frenzy. Within minutes, the hashtag #vacationbaby trended worldwide. Some fans dissected every emoji for hidden meaning. Others created memes mocking the couple's past scandals. Producers from the show seized the moment, releasing a teaser clip of Kirk looking nervous during a recent confessional. The caption read, "Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried." Viewers flooded the comments, demanding a full episode. Downstairs, Kirk's phone buzzed with alerts he refused to open. Instead, he poured himself a drink and sat in the dim light, replaying every interaction from the Miami trip. He remembered the stranger with the camera, the casual questions from a man at the hotel bar, the way Tasha had seemed unusually nervous. A realization struck him with chilling clarity. This was not random. Someone had orchestrated the leak, the photo, maybe even the DNA test. But who had enough motive to destroy him and Rashida at the same time? His mind cycled through names: former business partners, jealous exes, rivals in the music scene, each possibility more dangerous than the last. The next morning brought no relief. Reporters gathered outside the Frost home, their voices carrying through the windows. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, watching the spectacle unfold. Inside, Rashida emerged from the bedroom wearing dark glasses, her face unreadable. She walked past Kirk without a word and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice cracking. She paused only long enough to say, "To get the truth." Then she was gone, leaving Kirk standing in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. Rashida drove straight to a private investigator's office downtown. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla, listened carefully as Rashida laid out the situation. "I need to know if that DNA test is real, who leaked it, and if there's really a child involved," Rashida said, her voice trembling despite her calm exterior. Carla nodded, scribbling notes. "I can start with the photo metadata and trace the source of the leak. It might take time, but we'll get answers." Rashida exhaled, a flicker of relief passing through her chest. For the first time since the scandal broke, she felt a sliver of control. Meanwhile, Kirk received a call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. A distorted voice greeted him. "You want this to go away? Meet me tonight. Same airport lounge where we took the picture. Come alone." The line went dead before he could respond. Kirk's pulse raced. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and now they were calling the shots. He debated telling Rashida, but she was already gone, and he feared this could spiral faster if outsiders got involved. By late evening, the Frost household was a powder keg of unanswered questions. Rashida returned home with no new information but a determination that hardened her gaze. Kirk pretended to be calm, though every muscle in his body hummed with anxiety. Over dinner, the silence between them was heavy enough to crush any attempt at small talk. Finally, Rashida broke it. "I hired someone to find out who leaked that test," she said flatly. Kirk set down his fork. "Good. Maybe then you'll see. I'm not lying." She met his eyes, her voice steady but cold. "Or maybe I'll finally get proof of what you've been hiding." Their children, sensing the tension, stayed quiet, eyes darting between their parents. The youngest asked if everything was okay, and Rashida forced a smile. "Everything's fine, baby," she said, though the lie tasted bitter. After dinner, Kirk slipped out of the house, claiming he needed air. Rashida watched from the window as he drove away, suspicion tightening around her like a vice. She knew he was headed somewhere important. She just didn't know where or who might be waiting for him when he arrived. At the airport lounge, Kirk scanned the dimly lit space for the caller. A man in a baseball cap waved him over to a secluded corner. "You want this to end," the man said, voice low but clear. "Then you'll pay for the original documents. Otherwise, the next leak will ruin you completely." Kirk's blood ran cold. This was blackmail. Before he could respond, the man slid a small envelope across the table. "Inside is proof of everything, but the price goes up tomorrow." With that, the stranger disappeared into the crowd, leaving Kirk with a choice that could either save his marriage or destroy it forever. Kirk sat frozen with the envelope resting against his palm, the thin paper feeling heavier than stone. Around him the lounge hummed with the sound of clinking glasses and boarding calls. But it all seemed distant, as if he were underwater. He thought about Rashida at home, about the look in her eyes when she whispered that she no longer knew what was real. Paying the stranger might buy silence, but it would not buy trust. He slipped the envelope into his jacket and stood, his mind a blur of calculations. If he gave in, the blackmailer would only come back for more. If he refused, the next leak could be catastrophic. The choice felt like walking a tightrope with no net. On the drive back, his phone vibrated with a stream of notifications. New articles, new theories, new accusations. One headline stopped him cold. Anonymous source claims Rasheeda plans secret paternity test. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. If the investigator moved quickly, and the test proved the child was his, the damage would be permanent. Yet if it proved his innocence, the relief might come too late to mend the fracture already spreading through his marriage. Back at the house, Rashida sat in the living room with her laptop open, scrolling through a flood of messages. Friends she had not heard from in years were offering sympathy. Journalists were requesting interviews, and fans were pleading for a statement. She ignored them all. When Kirk finally walked in, she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. Kirk hesitated, the lie forming before he could stop it. "Just clearing my head." Rashida tilted her head, studying him. "Funny how your head always needs clearing when trouble finds you." Before he could answer, Ms. Shirlene entered from the kitchen holding her phone. "Baby, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight. She handed Rashida the screen, where a new video clip was already going viral. It showed Kirk in the airport lounge earlier that evening, meeting the mysterious man. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Gasps filled the room as the camera angle shifted to capture Kirk sliding the envelope into his jacket. "Care to explain that?" Rashida asked, her tone icy. Kirk's mind raced. Someone had followed him again, feeding the narrative with perfect timing. "It's not what it looks like," he began, but Rashida cut him off. "That's the same line you used last time. I'm done with lines, Kirk. I need the truth." Her voice cracked on the last word, the strain of sleepless nights and relentless scrutiny finally breaking through. Kirk stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "I'm being blackmailed. That man claims to have proof that the DNA test is fake. He wants money to keep it quiet." The room fell silent. Even Ms. Shirlene paused, her suspicion momentarily replaced by surprise. "Proof it's fake," Rashida repeated, her anger colliding with confusion. Kirk nodded. "He says someone forged the results to make it look like I have a child. I don't know who or why, but he has documents." Ms. Shirlene crossed her arms. "And you believed him enough to meet in secret?" Kirk exhaled. "I didn't pay him. I just took the envelope." He pulled it from his jacket and placed it on the coffee table. The three of them stared at it as if it might explode. Rashida reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several printed emails and a set of lab documents bearing the same logo as the leaked DNA test. Across each page, a watermark read "Sample only, not valid." At the bottom was a note typed in bold letters. "The truth costs more than a screenshot." Rashida's breath caught. If the documents were authentic, the entire scandal could be a carefully crafted hoax. But who would go to such lengths? And why target them now? Before they could process the discovery, Rashida's phone buzzed with a new message from Carla, the investigator. The text read, "Preliminary findings suggest the leaked test was digitally altered. We'll explain in person tomorrow." Rashida's heart skipped. Relief flickered, but so did fear. If someone could fake a DNA test and orchestrate a blackmail scheme, what else were they capable of? The family sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a heavy fog. Kirk finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just gossip anymore. Someone is trying to ruin us on purpose." Rashida met his eyes, searching for sincerity. For the first time in days, she saw no evasions, only exhaustion. "If you're telling the truth," she said slowly, "then we need to fight this together. But if there's anything you're still hiding, Kirk, it ends now." He nodded, the hint of a tear glistening in the corner of his eye. "I swear, I'm done hiding." Outside, the crowd of reporters continued to grow, their cameras trained on the house like vultures waiting for a final collapse. Inside, the Frost family faced a new reality, one where the enemy was invisible, the evidence unstable, and the line between love and betrayal thinner than ever. As the night stretched on, Rashida placed the envelope back on the table and whispered, "Tomorrow, we find out who did this." The room fell quiet again, each of them lost in the same unspoken question. when the truth finally surfaced, would it set them free or tear them apart? Morning light crept through the blinds, but sleep had been impossible for anyone in the Frost household. Rashida sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope as if it might reveal more secrets overnight. Across from her, Kirk nursed a mug of black coffee, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. The children had already left for school under the watchful escort of a family friend, sparing them from the swarm of reporters who still crowded the driveway. The quiet should have felt like relief, but it only made the tension sharper. Every tick of the clock echoed like a warning. Carla, the private investigator, arrived promptly at 9. Her calm presence cut through the charged air as she set a slim laptop on the table. "I've reviewed the metadata from the leaked photo and the DNA document," she began, her voice measured. Both were uploaded from the same anonymous server. The document shows signs of digital alteration, layered text, inconsistent fonts, and timestamps that don't match the lab system. She tapped a key, displaying side-by-side images of the leaked test and the forged elements. Whoever did this is skilled. They wanted the results to look authentic while leaving just enough flaws to keep you questioning. Rashida leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Can you trace the server?" Carla nodded cautiously. "It routes through multiple proxies, but there's a pattern in the encryption keys. I can follow it, but it will take time. Whoever set this up knows how to hide." Kirk rubbed his temples. "Time isn't something we have. Every hour this spreads, more people think I'm a father to a child that doesn't exist." Carla gave a thin smile. "Then we fight the rumor with proof. I've already contacted the actual lab. They confirmed no such test was processed under your name. I'll have a formal statement by tomorrow." The words brought a rush of relief, but Rashida felt no victory. "Tomorrow might be too late," she whispered. "The world already believes the lie." Her mother stood by the counter, arms folded. "Let them talk for now. When the truth comes out, they'll choke on their own gossip." But even Ms. Shirlene's bravado could not mask the fear in her eyes. Just as Carla packed up her laptop, Kirk's phone rang with a new unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered on speaker. A distorted voice crackled through. "You think you's..." Hashtags like #MiamiBaby and #Kirk caught on cam trended worldwide. Comment sections flooded with speculation. Some users swore the baby looked just like Kirk. Others dissected the video frame by frame, convinced they spotted Rashida's jewelry on the woman's wrist, sparking absurd theories of a family cover-up. Rashida's phone buzzed non-stop with notifications she refused to read. Instead, she confronted Kirk, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and exhaustion. "You told me there was no woman, no child. Explain that video." Kirk ran a hand over his face. "That's Tasha, the same woman from the airport. She showed up at the hotel to pitch a business deal. There was no affair, Rashida, I swear it." Rashida's eyes narrowed. "And the baby? Somebody planted that carrier," he said, desperation rising. "You think I'd be dumb enough to hug a woman in public if I was hiding a baby? This is a setup." Ms. Shirlene slammed her palm on the counter. "Whether it's a setup or not, the streets don't care. They see a baby, they believe the story. You need to get ahead of this before it destroys what's left of your reputation." Kirk clenched his fists. "And say what? That someone is staging photos and videos to ruin me. No one will believe it." Carla, still calm, interjected. "They might if we produce the source. That video's metadata will tell me where it was edited. Whoever is behind this left a fingerprint somewhere." While Carla worked, Rashida retreated to the backyard for air. The autumn breeze felt cool against her burning skin. Her thoughts churned in endless circles. Love, betrayal, loyalty, humiliation. She remembered the vows they had renewed after the last scandal. The promises Kirk made about transparency, the late nights spent rebuilding trust. And now this. Her phone vibrated again, but this time the name on the screen made her pause. It was Tasha, she answered with a cautious hello. A nervous voice responded, "Rashida, it's Tasha, please hear me out. I didn't leak anything. I never even took a DNA test with Kirk. But someone is threatening me too." Rashida's grip tightened. "Who?" Tasha hesitated. "I don't know his name, but he called himself the broker. He said if I didn't play along, he'd ruin my business and release private photos of me. He paid someone to follow us in Miami. He told me to act friendly so it looked like we were closer than we are." Rashida's stomach dropped. Why would he do this? Tasha's voice cracked. "He wants money, fame, maybe revenge. I don't know. I'm scared." Rashida's mind raced as the puzzle pieces began to align. "Meet me tonight," she said, "somewhere safe. We need to compare everything." Tasha agreed, promising to text a location. Back inside, Rashida relayed the call to Kirk and Carla. Kirk looked both relieved and wary. "If she's telling the truth, we finally have a lead." But what if it's another trap? Carla nodded slowly. We proceed carefully. I'll set up surveillance. If this broker shows up, we might catch him. As the night stretched on, and the Atlanta air turned heavy with a storm that threatened to crack open the sky, Kirk paced the length of his studio office like a man possessed. Phone in hand, eyes darting to the door each time a floorboard creaked, while Rashida remained at the house, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as if the granite could anchor her to a reality that was spinning out of control. The leaked DNA results had already flooded fan pages and gossip blogs, igniting a frenzy of comments that painted her life in cruel shades of betrayal. And she could hear the phantom echoes of strangers dissecting her marriage as if it were a televised sport, each refresh of her phone bringing new claims, new sources, and new heartbreak. And while she wanted to shut it all out, she also needed to know every word that was being said, because ignorance felt like surrender. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat in her own apartment across town, phone buzzing with missed calls from producers who smelled ratings in the chaos. Her eyes swollen from hours of silent crying because what started as a calculated reveal had now spiraled into a beast that even she could not control, the DNA leak making her both villain and victim depending on which comment thread you read. And though she told herself this was her chance to secure a future for her child, she could not shake the guilt that gnawed at her. Each time she pictured the look on Rashida's face when the truth finally slammed into her like a freight train. A truth that Kirk still hadn't confirmed aloud, even as the evidence burned in the palms of their hands. And when his phone finally lit up with a call from his longtime friend and manager Debo, Kirk hesitated before answering, knowing that every word of this conversation might decide whether his family shattered or somehow limped toward an impossible reconciliation. And Debo wasted no time, his voice tight with urgency as he warned that producers were considering a live sit-down to set the record straight, a move that could either clear Kirk's name if the leak proved fake or bury him under a mountain of public judgment if it was real. And Kirk's silence on the other end was answer enough, prompting Debo to lower his voice and ask the question everyone feared. Man, is it yours? A question that sliced through the room like broken glass, leaving Kirk clutching the phone as if the device itself might offer mercy, his mind flashing through every decision, every secret trip, every fleeting moment when temptation won over loyalty, until he finally whispered a choked, "I don't know," a confession so small, yet so devastating that Debo exhaled a curse and instructed him to get home before Rashida made her own move, because the streets were talking, and once the cameras arrived, there would be no turning back. And with that warning hanging in the humid air, Kirk grabbed his keys and bolted for the door, heart pounding as thunder rumbled overhead like the judgment of a universe tired of his games. Kirk's tires screeched against the slick pavement as he sped through the nearly deserted Atlanta streets, the flashing lights of late-night diners and 24-hour gas stations blurring into a single smear of color while his mind replayed every reckless choice that had brought him to this moment, each turn of the steering wheel pulling him closer to a house that no longer felt like a home but a courtroom where love and betrayal would be weighed without mercy. And inside that house, Rashida paced the living room with a fury so sharp it felt electric, the leaked DNA report still glowing on her tablet where a fan had tagged her with a cruel caption that read "Wife or Fool," her heart pounding as she tried to breathe through the humiliation of millions of strangers speculating about her marriage. And when Kirk finally burst through the door, the sound of it crashing against the frame was enough to make her flinch, though she refused to step back, instead planting her feet like a warrior ready for battle, eyes blazing as she demanded, without greeting, without hesitation, "Is it true?" The question landing like a slap in the humid air between them, and Kirk, normally smooth with excuses and half-truths, could only stare, the words tangling in his throat as Rashida pressed forward, voice rising with every syllable. "Did you go on that vacation with her? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Her accusations slicing through the room while the baby monitor upstairs crackled faintly, as if their sleeping child could somehow sense the earthquake unfolding below. And Kirk finally managed a broken "I don't know," a confession that only deepened the wound as Rashida's eyes filled with a mix of rage and despair. The silence that followed so heavy it seemed to pull the walls inward, until a sudden buzzing from Kirk's phone shattered the moment. Another notification from the gossip blogs now claiming an exclusive interview with Jasmine scheduled for the following morning, a headline promising even more revelations and fanning the flames of a drama that had already consumed their lives. And Rashida snatched the phone before he could react, scanning the screen with trembling hands as comments poured in from fans who had once celebrated their love story but were now writing obituaries for their marriage. Words like betrayal, coward, and justice for Rashida flashing across the screen in a relentless tide that left her both furious and strangely numb. and when Kirk tried to reach for her, she stepped back with a coldness that chilled the room, whispering through clenched teeth that she needed air before turning and storming out into the night, leaving Kirk frozen in the doorway as the storm outside finally broke open, rain slamming against the roof in a furious rhythm that matched the chaos in his chest. And while he stood there, drenched in regret and indecision, Jasmine sat across town rehearsing lines for her interview, her own heart heavy with doubt as she stared at the sleeping baby who might or might not share Kirk's blood, the weight of a decision that could destroy or liberate 3 lives pressing down until she could barely breathe. And even as the cameras began setting up for the next day's explosive broadcast, the city itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, fans refreshing their feeds, friends choosing sides, and producers sharpening their scripts, all waiting for a truth that promised to break more than just ratings. This segment is roughly another 650 to 700 words. I will continue sending consecutive pieces until the full continuation reaches about 3,000 words. Here comes the next piece. The rain kept falling in sheets that turned the streets into rivers, while Rashida drove aimlessly through the dark, wipers struggling to keep up as her mind swirled with memories of every sacrifice she had made to build the life now unraveling before her eyes, each red light a cruel reminder of the stops and starts of a marriage that had survived infidelity before, but never a public humiliation of this magnitude, and she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, replaying Kirk's weak admission and the leaked report that claimed a 99% match, a number that mocked her with its certainty even as a small voice in her heart whispered that love was never measured by statistics. And when her phone buzzed with a message from her longtime friend and fellow cast member, Erica, she answered without thinking, the warmth of a familiar voice slicing through the storm as Erica urged her to come over before the paparazzi found her. A warning that Rasheeda heeded by swinging the car toward a quiet suburb where lights glowed in the windows of Erica's home like a refuge in a war zone. And once inside, Rasheeda collapsed onto the couch, the words spilling out in a torrent of disbelief, anger, and aching vulnerability as Erica listened with wide eyes, offering tissues and the kind of blunt advice only a true friend could give, telling her that the world might be watching but the next move belonged entirely to her. A truth that settled like a seed in Rasheeda's heart, even as the storm outside roared on. And across town, Kirk sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall, each smiling image a painful reminder of promises made and broken, until a sudden knock rattled the front door and he opened it to find Debo standing there, soaked to the bone, eyes blazing with the urgency of someone carrying both bad news and a desperate plan. And without waiting for an invitation, Debo stepped inside and declared that if Kirk didn't take control of the narrative now, tomorrow's interview would finish him, urging him to release his own statement or even show up at the studio, unannounced, to confront Jasmine on air. A reckless idea that nevertheless sparked a flicker of resolve in Kirk's weary mind because for the first time all night he felt the stirrings of action instead of helplessness. And as the two men plotted in hushed tones, the cameras across the city continued to roll, capturing every rumor, every whispered betrayal, and every heartbeat of a saga that refused to rest, setting the stage for a showdown that fans were already calling the most explosive moment in the history of their reality empire. Morning crept over Atlanta with a gray, restless light that seemed to carry the weight of every rumor swirling through the city. And while most people were just beginning their day, Rasheeda sat in Erica's guest room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, the faint circles under her eyes proof of a sleepless night spent replaying Kirk's halting confession and the cruel certainty of the leaked DNA results, each memory a fresh stab of pain that refused to dull no matter how many deep breaths she took. And as her phone buzzed with a dozen new notifications, she forced herself to look, finding messages from producers begging her to appear on camera, from fans offering sympathy or outrage, and from anonymous numbers promising inside details if she would only answer, but she ignored them all, focusing instead on the single name she both dreaded and longed to see: Kirk, who had not called or texted since their confrontation, leaving her to wonder whether he was strategizing with Debo, hiding with Jasmine, or simply too ashamed to face her again. And as she stood to stretch, Erica entered carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a quiet strength that Rasheeda leaned on like a lifeline. The two women, speaking in low voices about choices, dignity, and the possibility of walking away even as the love Rasheeda still felt for her husband clung stubbornly to the edges of her heart. And across town, Kirk was already in motion, driving toward the television studio where Jasmine's interview was scheduled, every mile tightening the knot in his stomach as he imagined the questions, the cameras, and the millions of eyes waiting to dissect his every flinch. And beside him in the passenger seat, Debo laid out a strategy that sounded more like a battle plan than a public statement, instructing Kirk to stay calm, deny nothing, and demand a second test live on air to challenge the credibility of the leak. A gamble that might buy time or backfire spectacularly, but which Kirk clung to as the only shred of control in a narrative that had spun far beyond his grasp. And when they arrived at the studio, they found chaos already in motion. Reporters crowding the entrance, security guards shouting over the noise, and camera crews scrambling to capture every angle of a scandal that promised record-breaking ratings. And as Kirk stepped from the car, a wave of flashing lights and shouted questions crashed over him. The cacophony of voices demanding to know whether he was the father, whether his marriage was over, whether the leak was true. But he kept his eyes fixed on the door ahead, jaw clenched, heart hammering like a war drum as Debo cleared a path through the sea of microphones. And inside the lobby, Jasmine stood flanked by her own handlers, her face pale beneath layers of makeup as she caught sight of Kirk. The sudden tension between them so sharp that even the camera operators paused, sensing that the real drama was about to unfold before the official interview even began. The studio air crackled with a tension that felt almost physical as Kirk strode toward Jasmine, each step echoing against the polished floor like a countdown to an explosion. And the producers, sensing a ratings goal, scrambled to position cameras while pretending to keep order, their voices sharp but their eyes glittering with anticipation. And when Kirk finally stopped in front of Jasmine, the silence between them was thick enough to drown in, broken only when she whispered his name with a tremor that betrayed the storm beneath her carefully painted calm. A sound that tightened the knot in his chest as he fought to keep his voice steady, asking whether she truly believed the leak or if this entire spectacle was another ploy by the network to push them into a corner. And Jasmine, clutching her phone like a shield, admitted that she never meant for it to go this far. That the original plan was to request a private confirmation, but the producers had convinced her that a public reveal would secure both her child's future and her own. And as the words tumbled out, Kirk felt a wave of anger and pity crash over him. Anger at the manipulation and pity for the woman who had allowed herself to become a pawn in a game neither of them fully controlled. And before he could respond, the studio doors opened to a fresh surge of chaos as Rashida entered unannounced, her arrival like a spark thrown into dry tinder. Fans outside screaming her name, while security scrambled to contain the crowd pressing against the glass. And inside every camera swung to capture her poised yet furious figure, dressed in a sharp black jacket that made her look less like a reality star and more like a queen prepared for war. Her eyes locking first on Kirk, then on Jasmine, before she crossed the room with measured steps that carried the weight of years of betrayal and resilience. Stopping only when she stood between them, her voice calm but deadly as she demanded to know why the two of them were planning a televised circus, while the children at home waited for answers. And the room fell silent except for the hum of the lights and the faint clicking of camera shutters. The world outside reduced to a blur as all attention centered on the triangle of pain and accusation before them. And Kirk, realizing there would be no private strategy, no controlled narrative, finally took a deep breath and announced for everyone to hear that he would agree to a live DNA test on air. A declaration that sent the crowd of producers and reporters into a frenzy, their shouts overlapping as Rashida's face hardened with a mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration, and Jasmine's eyes filled with tears that threatened to undo the careful mask she had worn since arriving. Because in that single decision, Kirk had shifted the entire game, turning a scripted spectacle into a raw confrontation with truth that no one, not the producers, not the fans, not even the players themselves could fully predict. And as technicians rushed to set up a testing station and legal teams whispered frantic warnings about liability, the three of them were ushered toward the main stage where bright lights and a wall of cameras waited to capture what would become the most explosive live broadcast in the show's history, a moment so charged with emotion that even the seasoned crew members found themselves holding their breath as Kirk took his seat. Rashida settled beside him with icy dignity, and Jasmine lowered herself into the chair opposite them, her trembling hands hidden beneath the table as the host welcomed millions of viewers to a spectacle that promised answers but guaranteed heartbreak. The host, a seasoned interviewer with a voice trained to turn tension into spectacle, leaned forward with a practiced smile that barely concealed the excitement sparking in her eyes as she welcomed the live audience and millions of viewers at home to what she called a night of truth and revelation, her words slicing through the hushed studio while Kirk sat rigid under the unforgiving lights, Rashida's jaw set in a line of iron beside him, and Jasmine, shifting uneasily across the table as the cameras zoomed in for every flicker of emotion. The host, wasting no time before recounting the explosive events that had brought them to this stage: the secret vacation, the leaked DNA results, the torrent of fan speculation, each phrase a needle meant to draw blood as she invited Kirk to explain himself, and he cleared his throat with a sound that betrayed the turmoil beneath his controlled exterior, speaking slowly as he admitted to past mistakes but insisting that the truth of the child's paternity could only be proven by science and not by rumor, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart as he declared his willingness to face whatever the results revealed, a statement that drew gasps from the audience and a murmur of admiration from those watching live feeds in homes and bars across the city. And when the hosts turned to Rashida, asking how she felt in this moment of public reckoning, she lifted her chin and spoke with a quiet strength that commanded the room, saying that while the humiliation of the leak had cut her deeply, she would not allow fear or pride to dictate the future of her family, that she demanded truth not for the cameras but for her children and her own peace of mind. And the applause that followed carried a current of respect that even Kirk felt in his bones. Yet the tension only sharpened as the host finally faced Jasmine, inviting her to share her side of the story. And Jasmine's eyes glistened under the harsh studio lights as she explained in a trembling voice that her intention had never been to destroy a marriage, that she had been swept up in promises of clarity and protection for her child, only to realize too late that the producers had turned her vulnerability into a weapon for ratings. Her confession landing like a soft but undeniable blow that left the audience torn between sympathy and outrage. And as the technicians entered with the DNA collection kits, the studio fell into an almost reverent silence, the weight of impending truth pressing down on every soul present. And Kirk extended his hand without hesitation as a nurse swabbed the inside of his cheek, Rashida watching with unblinking eyes while Jasmine followed suit, her fingers trembling as the swab brushed against her own child's samples sealed in a carefully labeled envelope. And when the host announced that the expedited results would be processed during the live broadcast, the audience erupted in a mixture of cheers and nervous chatter, the atmosphere a volatile blend of anticipation and dread, as the three central figures sat beneath the hot lights waiting for science to decide the fate of their intertwined lives, every second stretching into an eternity as social media exploded with live reactions, hashtags trending worldwide within minutes, and viewers around the globe refreshing their screens with bated breath for the revelation that would either shatter or salvage the fragile remnants of a family already pushed to its breaking point. The studio's countdown clock glowed red against the dim background as the technicians disappeared behind curtains to process the swabs, leaving Kirk, Rashida, and Jasmine in a tense triangle beneath the relentless lights. And every second that ticked forward seemed to tighten the air until breathing felt like a deliberate act, the audience whispering among themselves while the hosts filled the silence with carefully measured commentary about the power of truth and the courage to face consequences, phrases that only deepened the ache in Rashida's chest as she stared at the polished floor and fought to keep her expression calm, and Kirk could feel the camera zooming in on his face, capturing every flicker of doubt and regret as memories of that ill-fated vacation played on a loop in his mind, each flash of sunlit beaches now tainted with the knowledge that a single careless night might have rewritten the story of his marriage. While Jasmine sat rigid across from him, her hands hidden beneath the table as she silently prayed for an outcome that would give her child security without destroying the fragile dignity she still clung to. And in homes across the country, fans refreshed their feeds with nervous energy, their comments flooding social media with theories, accusations, and tearful pleas for reconciliation. The digital noise, a relentless storm that neither the studio walls nor the heavy curtains could keep out. And when the host finally returned with a tablet clutched in both hands, the room went so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioning sounded deafening. The three figures at the table, straightening instinctively as she approached, her eyes flicking from one to the next before settling on the camera with the solemn gravity of someone about to detonate a truth bomb live on air. And she began to read slowly, each word landing like a drumbeat. The results of the paternity test indicate a probability of, before pausing just long enough to make heart stutter, then delivering the number with crisp finality, 0.0%. A revelation that detonated through the studio in a roar of shocked gasps, clapping hands, and shouted expletives as the audience leapt to their feet, some cheering, some stunned into silence. While Kirk exhaled a ragged breath of disbelief and Rashida's eyes widened in a mix of relief and residual anger, and Jasmine covered her mouth as tears spilled freely, the weight of months of suspicion and manipulation crashing over her in a flood of exhausted emotion. And for a single moment, the chaos froze around the three of them like a photograph, each absorbing the meaning of a number that both freed and condemned. Because though the test cleared Kirk of paternity, it also exposed the ruthless machinations of producers who had fed rumors and leaked documents for ratings. And as the host attempted to regain order with a plea for calm, the audience only grew louder, chanting Rasheeda's name in a wave of support that left her trembling, the sound washing over her like both vindication and a reminder of the private healing still ahead. And Kirk reached for her hand with a tentative gesture that carried 1,000 unsaid apologies, his eyes pleading for a chance to rebuild even as she kept her gaze forward, jaw tight with the knowledge that forgiveness was not a prize to be claimed on live television. And Jasmine, still crying, leaned toward her microphone to apologize publicly for the chaos she had unleashed, her voice breaking as she explained how fear for her child's future had been twisted into a spectacle she could no longer recognize. And in that vulnerable confession, the audience felt a shift, the furious energy softening into something almost compassionate as the host thanked her for her honesty and promised further investigation into the leak. Yet, even as the cameras began their slow fade to commercial, the story was far from finished, because the truth might have cleared Kirk's name, but it left a trail of broken trust, lingering questions, and an entire fan base hungry for the next twist in a saga that had already redefined reality television. Kirk's breathing grew heavier as he stepped back into the glare of the set lights, sweat collecting at his hairline. Though the studio air was cool, the echo of the earlier confrontation still vibrating through the narrow corridors like a trapped storm that refused to settle. And with every slow exhale, he replayed the flash of anger in Mendici's eyes, the split second when a decision to lunge or to speak could have changed everything. But instead of clarity, he felt only a deeper pull into the chaos that love and hip-hop thrived on. A chaos that fed producers their ratings and fed cast members a strange mix of fame and humiliation, and he wondered when exactly he had signed away the right to keep his private life private, when the contracts he had once skimmed for dollar signs had quietly turned into contracts of emotional ransom where every glance, every hesitation, every late-night text could be sliced apart and served to millions who thought they knew him, who thought they understood the weight of the choices he carried home after the cameras stopped. He rubbed his temples and caught sight of Rashida across the room, her voice low as she spoke to a stylist, her eyes flicking toward him in a way that made his stomach knot because there was history in that look. A shared recognition that tonight's fight with Mendici's was only the surface of a deeper unease, a long accumulation of missteps and half-truths that no single apology could clean. And though the cameras had not caught every whispered word between them over the years, the audience still sensed it, still smelled the tension like smoke from a fire they could not see but refused to stop searching for. Behind him, a producer called out instructions, the tone sharp but coaxing, reminding everyone that the next scene needed a raw energy, a confession or a clash, something that would make Monday night viewers lean forward with their hearts racing. And Kirk felt the familiar tug of performance tighten around his chest, that thin but unbreakable thread that bound his personal pain to public entertainment, turning private resentment into scripted chaos that millions would debate online as though they were all sitting in his living room, uninvited but somehow entitled to judge. He walked toward the makeup table, each step measured, and caught a glimpse of his reflection, the lines around his eyes deeper than last season, the faint tremor in his jaw betraying the adrenaline that still burned through his blood. And he thought of the quiet mornings before filming began, mornings when he still believed he could navigate this world without losing himself, when he told himself the show was only a platform, a stepping stone, a way to secure a future beyond music and nightlife. But now, staring at the man in the mirror, he wondered if the platform had become a cage, a place where every escape route led back to the same stage lights and the same endless cycle of drama. Outside the soundproofed doors, he could hear the faint ripple of the audience warming up, the laughter and chatter of people who had paid to witness this carefully packaged spectacle, and for a brief, almost guilty second, he envied their freedom, their ability to walk away when the credits rolled, to leave the tension behind while he remained locked inside it, forced to live with the aftermath of every headline and every cut of edited footage that painted him as hero or villain depending on the week. Rashida moved closer, her perfume cutting through the stale studio air, and in a voice only he could hear, she said, "You need to decide how far you're willing to let this go." And though her tone carried no threat, the words landed like a challenge, because Kirk knew she was not just talking about tonight's fight. She was talking about the slow erosion of trust, the endless temptations to turn pain into profit. And as he met her eyes, he felt the truth settle heavy in his chest. The cameras might capture the sparks, But the real fire was burning where no one was looking, and it was up to him to either smother it or let it consume everything he still hoped to save. The producer's voice cracked through the intercom again, sharper now, demanding everyone take their marks. And the sudden clang of urgency snapped Kirk out of his private spiral, pushing him back toward the center of the set where the lights bled white across the polished floor and every shadow seemed to carry the memory of what had just happened. A memory that would soon be sliced into angles and close-ups for the next episode's cold open. And as he crossed the space, he caught a glimpse of Mendices leaning against a pillar, jaw tight, arms folded like steel bars across his chest, eyes tracking Kirk with the quiet calculation of a man weighing every possible next move, not for survival but for spectacle, because both of them knew the show rewarded escalation, the slow burn of a feud that promised to explode at the perfect time. And yet beneath that knowledge Kirk felt a smaller, more personal tension, a recognition of the old friendship that once tethered them before cameras and contracts built a wall of distrust. Between every handshake and every smile, the background noise swelled as crew members shifted equipment, the buzz of fluorescent lights mixing with the hum of hidden microphones, and Kirk's thoughts flickered to the outside world, where his children were likely asleep, where social media would already be chewing through rumors of the fight, where strangers would pick apart each movement as if decoding a language only the cast could truly understand. And the weight of that unseen audience pressed down like a second gravity, reminding him that even silence could be twisted into narrative if it served the next plotline. Rashida stepped forward to join him, her expression unreadable, her presence both comfort and challenge, and when their shoulders brushed, he felt a small surge of steadiness, a reminder that beyond the chaos they still shared a history too layered for any producer to script. A history that carried its own bruises but also its own resilience. A camera operator signaled readiness, the red tally light snapping alive like a watchful eye, and Kirk inhaled deeply, forcing his heartbeat into something resembling rhythm as the director counted down from 5, the familiar ritual pulling him into the strange trance that always preceded filming, where personal doubts blurred into professional instinct and every glance, every breath had to balance authenticity with performance. When the cue arrived, Mendices pushed off the pillar and moved closer, his voice low but steady as he began to speak, the words carefully chosen yet sharp enough to draw invisible blood, and Kirk responded in kind, matching tone for tone. While inside, he fought the urge to either laugh or walk away, because he could feel the manipulation wrapping around them both like invisible wire, the knowledge that no matter how real the anger felt, it was also currency. The lifeblood of a show that thrived on the fragile intersection of truth and entertainment. The exchange grew tighter, words overlapping until the crew leaned in with a collective breath. And for a heartbeat Kirk felt the room contract, the air thick with attention so dense it seemed to pulse against his skin. But instead of breaking, he held the line, letting the silence stretch just long enough to draw the audience deeper before he delivered his final remark. A statement that sounded casual but carried a quiet warning only Mendices would fully grasp. The director called cut, the sound slicing through the heavy air like a blade, and the set erupted in a sudden bustle of movement, assistants rushing forward, makeup artists darting in with brushes and powders, producers whispering quick notes as if nothing had happened. Yet Kirk knew the scene would live far beyond these walls, living on in edits and replays and endless online debates where his motives would be questioned and his every expression slowed down for microscopic analysis. He turned away from the crowd and let his eyes rest on a distant exit sign, the red glow steady and calm against the chaos. And for a fleeting second he imagined walking through that door and leaving it all behind. The lights, the cameras, the relentless hunger for conflict. But then he felt Rashida's hand graze his arm. A silent tether to the life they had built and the obligations they still carried, and the fantasy dissolved, replaced by the steady thrum of reality that whispered he was still here, still part of the story. Still bound to a world where every quiet decision would echo louder than any scripted shout. Kirk remained near the glowing exit sign for a long moment after the set began to empty, his thoughts moving in heavy circles that refused to settle. The muffled sounds of crew members packing up gear and distant laughter from another studio mixing into a strange echo that made the night feel both hollow and charged. And as he finally turned back toward the main floor, he caught sight of Rashida talking quietly with a producer. Her face composed yet sharpened by a tension that only he would recognize. A subtle tightening of the eyes that signaled she was replaying every detail of the evening's confrontation, in search of hidden meaning, because even when the cameras stopped rolling, the show demanded a constant vigilance, a readiness to defend against the next ambush of rumor or revelation. He walked toward her slowly, feeling the weight of the stage lights even though most of them had been dimmed. their leftover heat clinging to the air like a reminder that performance never truly ended here. And as he approached, he heard the tail end of the producer's sentence, something about a possible mid-season teaser. Something about keeping the vacation baby speculation alive for ratings, and the phrase struck him like a sudden crack of thunder, because it meant the story he thought might quietly fade was instead about to be magnified, dissected, and broadcast to millions who would treat it as both scandal and entertainment. Rashida met his eyes, a brief flicker of shared understanding passing between them before she excused herself from the conversation, stepping closer until only a few feet of charged air separated them. And in that small space, Kirk felt the familiar push and pull of their complicated bond, the years of love and betrayal and cautious rebuilding that had taught them both how to fight without words. "They're not letting this go," she said softly, her voice steady but edged with fatigue, and Kirk answered with a slow nod, the gesture carrying more resignation than agreement. Because he knew she was right, the producers would stretch the narrative until it reached breaking point, because a storyline built on leaked DNA tests and whispered betrayals was too profitable to abandon. Rashida exhaled, the sound almost lost beneath the scrape of moving equipment, and for a heartbeat, Kirk imagined a world where they could simply walk out together, leave the contracts and the cameras and the endless cycle of public judgment behind. But the reality of obligations and bills and a lifestyle tied to the show pressed in with relentless certainty. Before he could speak, a stagehand approached with a polite but urgent reminder that a final confessional was still required for the night's shoot, and Kirk felt the weight of the request settle across his shoulders like an iron cloak, because the confessional meant speaking directly to the unseen audience, offering them pieces of his private thoughts while knowing every word would be edited for maximum drama. He glanced at Rashida, searching her face for some sign of whether she wanted to join him or stay behind, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together, even when together felt like another performance. They followed the stagehand down a narrow hallway lined with soundproof panels, the low hum of the building's ventilation system filling the silence between them, and Kirk's mind raced through possible approaches to the interview, weighing honesty against strategy, anger against restraint, because he understood that the confessional was both trap and weapon, a chance to shape the narrative or to be shaped by it. When they reached the small studio, a single camera waited beneath a halo of soft light, and the producer on duty greeted them with a professional smile that masked the quiet thrill of impending drama. Kirk took his seat, the familiar chair creaking slightly under his weight, and as the countdown began, he forced a calm expression, knowing that every blink, every shift of the eyes would be slowed down and analyzed by viewers hungry for clues. The red tally light flicked on, and the producer's voice prompted him to share his thoughts about the leaked DNA results and the rumors surrounding his vacation. The words delivered with a casual tone that barely disguised their pointed edge, and Kirk drew a slow breath before speaking, allowing a deliberate pause to stretch across the room like a held note. "People think they know everything," he began, his voice low but clear, each word chosen with the precision of someone aware that even silence carried its own meaning. "But what they see is only a fraction of the truth." He continued carefully, weaving a narrative that acknowledged tension without confirming accusations, offering enough intrigue to feed speculation while protecting the fragile line between public drama and private reality. And as he spoke, he felt Rashida's presence just beyond the edge of the frame, a steadying force that reminded him of the stakes that truly mattered: their family, their children, the life they had built beyond the reach of studio lights. When the producer finally called cut, the quiet click of the camera shutting down felt almost startling in its finality, and Kirk remained seated for a moment longer, staring into the fading glow of the red light as if it were a distant star, wondering how many more nights like this they could endure before the performance consumed everything they were trying to protect. Kirk lingered in the small confessional room long after the camera light dimmed, the silence pressing in on him like a thick curtain while distant echoes of crew chatter filtered faintly through the insulated walls, each sound a reminder that the night's performance was far from over, even though the official recording had ended. And as he finally rose from the chair, he felt the dull ache of exhaustion settle into his shoulders, a physical weight that carried the residue of every unspoken thought he had just restrained. He pushed open the door and stepped back into the hallway where the glow of emergency lights painted the walls with a sterile sheen, and there, leaning against the far end, near a stack of folded sound panels, Rashida waited with arms crossed and eyes sharp, her quiet presence somehow louder than any confrontation. She studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice low but charged with a tension that made the narrow corridor feel smaller than it was. "They're going to twist every word you said." Kirk met her gaze without flinching, the faint hum of the building's ventilation filling the pause between them, and after a beat, he replied, Then we stay ahead of them. The exchange was brief but loaded, an unspoken agreement that their survival in this world depended on strategy as much as truth. Together, they began the slow walk back toward the main stage, their footsteps echoing off the walls in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. Each step a reminder of the life they had chosen and the price it demanded. As they approached the wider corridor leading to the exit, the faint buzz of a phone vibrated against Kirk's pocket, an urgent tremor that instantly tightened his chest. And when he pulled it free, he saw a flood of notifications stacking across the screen: social media alerts, text messages, and a breaking headline from an entertainment blog that made his breath catch. Exclusive. Full DNA report confirms. Kirk's vacation child. The words glared back at him with the merciless brightness of a camera flash, and for a split second he considered tossing the phone into the nearest trash bin just to escape the relentless intrusion. But instead, he tightened his grip and opened the article, scanning the sensational lines that claimed to reveal private lab results and alleged conversations with anonymous insiders, each sentence crafted to inflame curiosity and judgment. Rashida stepped closer, reading over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. And though her expression remained composed, Kirk could feel the quiet storm gathering behind her controlled exterior, a storm he knew all too well from years of navigating public betrayals and private reconciliations. "This is going to explode by morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but weighted with certainty, and Kirk could only nod, the dull roar of inevitable fallout already building in his mind like the first rumble of an approaching storm. They resumed walking, the phone still buzzing intermittently with new alerts, each vibration a fresh reminder that their lives were no longer their own but content to be consumed, debated, and monetized by strangers who would never feel the sting of the headlines they so eagerly shared. By the time they reached the loading bay doors that opened to the back lot, the cool night air met them with a sudden sharpness, carrying the distant hum of city traffic and the faint metallic scent of rain on concrete. And for a moment Kirk simply stood there, breathing deeply as if the outside air could somehow cleanse the chaos clinging to him. Rashida joined him at the edge of the pavement, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon where the city lights flickered like restless stars. And after a long silence she said, "We can't keep letting them write our story." Kirk turned to face her, the determination in her voice igniting something deep within him, a stubborn resolve that cut through the haze of fatigue. And he answered with quiet conviction, "Then we write it ourselves." Before Rashida could respond, a sudden flash of light from the far corner of the lot drew their attention, the sharp click of a camera shutter cutting through the night like a small explosion, and Kirk's stomach tightened as he spotted a pair of paparazzi crouched behind a parked van, lenses glinting like the eyes of watchful predators, capturing every tilt of their heads, every trace of tension across their faces. Security guards hustled forward, their heavy boots slapping against the concrete as they barked warnings, but the photographers only retreated a few steps, snapping more images with mechanical precision before disappearing into the shadows with the speed of seasoned hunters. Rashida exhaled sharply, the sound edged with frustration, and Kirk felt a flicker of rage rise inside him, a deep, simmering anger at the endless intrusion that turned private pain into public spectacle. "It's like they're feeding off us," Rashida muttered, her voice trembling with restrained fury. Kirk placed a steady hand on her shoulder, a silent attempt to ground them both, though his own pulse hammered with the urge to chase down every camera and smash the evidence of their vulnerability. Instead, he guided her toward their waiting SUV where a driver stood ready, eyes lowered in professional neutrality, and once inside the dim interior the sudden quiet felt almost surreal, a fragile pocket of stillness, suspended between storms. As the car pulled away, the city outside blurred into streaks of neon and shadow, each passing billboard and streetlight reflecting off the tinted windows like fragmented memories of the life they once imagined, quieter, untouched by relentless scrutiny. Rashida leaned back against the seat, her face half hidden in the shifting glow, and after a long silence she whispered, "Do you ever think about just walking away?" Kirk turned toward her, the question hanging between them like a fragile thread, and he searched for an answer that might soothe without betraying the truth he carried deep inside, a truth shaped by contracts, financial obligations, and a strange loyalty to the very platform that continued to wound them. "Every day," he admitted finally, the words tasting both bitter and freeing. The admission settled over them like a shared confession, and for a moment the car felt less like a vehicle and more like a sanctuary where honesty could exist without consequence. But the sanctuary was temporary. Kirk's phone buzzed again with relentless urgency, and when he reluctantly checked the screen he saw a new message from his manager. "Producers want emergency meeting at sunrise. Crisis plan in motion." Be ready for cameras. The text burned across his vision, dragging him back to the reality they could not escape. Rashida noticed the shift in his expression and reached for his hand, her touch warm but firm. A silent reminder that they faced the storm together even when unity felt like another performance. Outside, the city lights thickened as they neared the expressway, a tangled web of motion that mirrored the chaos inside his mind. And Kirk found himself replaying the timeline of events that had brought them here, the vacation that was supposed to be a quiet escape, the unexpected encounter that now fueled rumors of a secret child, the leaked DNA report whose authenticity remained unproven yet carried the weight of undeniable drama. He thought of the unnamed woman at the center of the allegations, a figure whose face was now plastered across gossip sites, though her voice remained unheard, and he wondered whether she, too, felt trapped in the machinery of spectacle, or if she had willingly stepped into the spotlight. The question offered no comfort, only more uncertainty. And as the SUV merged onto the dark stretch of highway leading to their home, he tightened his grip on Rashida's hand, silently promising that whatever came next, they would face it together, even if together meant standing before cameras that thrived on tearing them apart. The SUV rolled off the expressway and wound through quiet residential streets where the glow of porch lights flickered like small signals of normal life. A life Kirk suddenly longed for, even as he knew it remained far out of reach. And as they approached the gated entrance of their neighborhood, the rhythmic patter of rain began against the roof, soft at first but quickly swelling into a steady downpour that drummed like restless fingers on the glass. The security guard waved them through with practiced efficiency, his polite nod carrying no hint that he might already know the headlines exploding across the internet, but Kirk still felt a flicker of paranoia, imagining whispers passing through even this private enclave before the night was over. Inside the car, Rashida shifted slightly closer, her arm brushing his in a silent search for reassurance, and he squeezed her hand without speaking, aware that words were fragile tools against the weight of the storm gathering around them. When they reached their driveway, the driver stepped out to open the door, his umbrella catching the rain in soft splashes of silver, and as Kirk helped Rashida out, he caught the faint glow of screens through neighboring windows, each rectangle of light a reminder of the countless strangers who would soon dissect their every move. They hurried inside, shaking off the chill as the door closed behind them, and for a moment the house felt like a fortress, its familiar scent of cedar and faint vanilla wrapping around them like a protective cloak. Yet the illusion of safety cracked almost immediately when Kirk's phone vibrated again, this time with a call from his manager that he could not ignore. He answered reluctantly, placing the call on speaker so Rashida could hear. And the manager's voice burst through, brisk and urgent. "The network is already planning a morning segment. They want a live statement. We need to control this before the tabloids spin it beyond recovery." Kirk rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion grinding against the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, and replied, "There's nothing to control if the report is fake." The manager hesitated, then said quietly, "The lab they're quoting is real. We can challenge the leak but not the legitimacy." Rashida stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the implication, and Kirk felt the room tilt slightly, as if the floor beneath him had shifted. "So what are you saying?" Rashida demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the static on the line. The manager exhaled audibly before answering, "I'm saying the numbers match. We need to discuss next steps before sunrise." The call ended with a promise of a pre-dawn meeting, leaving behind a silence that buzzed louder than any ringtone. Rashida turned toward Kirk, her expression a storm of disbelief and hurt, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound the relentless rain hammering against the windows. Finally she whispered, "Is it true?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, and Kirk felt every muscle in his body tighten as he searched for words that could bridge the chasm opening between them. "I don't know," he said at last, his voice rough with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I need to see the report myself." Rashida looked away, blinking rapidly as if to hold back a flood of emotions, and the sight pierced him more deeply than any accusation. He reached for her hand again, but this time she stepped back, her silence sharper than any shouted curse. Outside, a sudden clap of thunder rolled across the sky, the sound reverberating through the house like a warning, and Kirk felt a cold certainty settle into his chest. Whatever the truth behind the vacation rumors, the next few hours would define not only their relationship but the very narrative that millions of strangers were waiting to devour. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as the defense began presenting its side, a careful and deliberate effort to counter the tidal wave of evidence and emotional testimonies that had filled the previous sessions. And the lead attorney, a seasoned strategist with decades of experience in high-profile cases, rose with an air of calm authority. his voice measured but firm as he challenged the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, questioned the accuracy of the video footage, and introduced the possibility of manipulation or misinterpretation, weaving a narrative of doubt that clung to every sentence like a fine mist. While the accused sat stone-faced beside him, eyes forward but body tense, each cross-examination a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea, and as expert witnesses took the stand to analyze digital forensics, frame rates, and potential tampering, the jurors leaned forward, absorbing technical jargon that could either dismantle or fortify the mountain of accusations. The gallery buzzing quietly as reporters scribbled notes and cameras outside the courthouse captured the steady trickle of updates that fed a hungry public. Yet beneath the legal arguments, a subtler battle unfolded, a psychological chess match where credibility and perception mattered as much as hard evidence. And the defense played this game with precision, introducing alternate timelines, casting suspicion on key informants, and suggesting that personal grudges or political motives might have colored earlier testimonies, each point landing like a carefully placed stone on an unsteady bridge, while the prosecution responded with renewed vigor, producing supplementary documents, subpoenaed text messages, and a surprise witness whose sudden appearance sent ripples of excitement through the chamber, the tension rising like a tide that threatened to breach the walls of decorum. But the judge maintained strict control, issuing stern warnings whenever voices climbed too high or arguments drifted into speculation, ensuring that the proceeding remained anchored in law despite the swirling drama. And outside the courthouse, protests grew louder, with supporters and critics separated by police barricades yet united in their intensity, their chants a chaotic soundtrack to the meticulous arguments unfolding within. And as days passed, the case became a test of endurance, each side calling specialists to dissect financial records, digital footprints, and psychological profiles, while the defendant's past was sifted through with forensic precision, revealing old business deals, former relationships, and fragments of private conversations that now took on new meaning under the harsh light of suspicion. And every revelation sparked a new cycle of media frenzy, social networks igniting with theories and leaked clips that blurred the line between fact and conjecture, creating a feedback loop where public opinion shifted daily, sometimes hourly, feeding back into the courtroom in subtle ways as jurors returned each morning with the weight of a nation's curiosity pressing on their shoulders. And yet amidst the noise, a quiet resilience took root, as the defense maintained its steady rhythm of questioning, presenting alibis, and undermining key assumptions, while the prosecution sharpened its focus, stripping away distractions to lay bare what it claimed was an undeniable pattern of deception and calculated harm. And when the final week approached, the air inside the courtroom grew heavy with anticipation, every bench filled, every breath measured, as both sides prepared their closing arguments, knowing that their final words could tilt the fragile balance one way or another. The jury silent and inscrutable as they absorbed the sum of months of evidence, the judge reminding all present that the verdict must rest on proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And as the lights dimmed slightly in the late afternoon sun, and the echo of the last gavel strike signaled a brief recess, the world outside held its breath, waiting for the decision that would either condemn or absolve, a decision that had become far more than the fate of a single person, standing instead as a symbol of truth, justice, and the complex human struggle to uncover what really happened when so many voices fought to control the narrative. When the court reconvened after the tense recess, the sense of collective anticipation felt almost physical, a low electric charge that seemed to hum beneath the polished wooden benches and along the marble columns as spectators, reporters, and legal teams settled back into place with a sharp awareness that the proceedings were reaching their critical point. And as the defendant returned to the table with a slow, measured stride, the room caught a glimpse of the quiet storm playing across their features, a flicker of fatigue mixed with a stubborn thread of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Despite the relentless pressure of weeks of testimony, and the lead prosecutor rose first, stepping into the center of the courtroom with a deliberate pause that allowed the silence to stretch until every eye was locked upon her, her voice rising steady and unyielding as she began a meticulous review of the evidence, each item introduced like a carefully laid brick in a fortress of logic, revisiting the digital records that mapped suspicious transactions down to the minute, the eyewitness accounts that converged, despite coming from different corners of the timeline, and the expert analyses that stripped away claims of tampering with clinical precision. And as she spoke, her words built a rhythm of inevitability, a slow tightening of the narrative that invited the jurors to follow her down a single unavoidable path toward guilt. But even as the argument gathered force, the defense sat poised like a coiled spring, scribbling notes, exchanging quick whispers, and waiting for the moment when the floor would again be theirs. And when it came, the defense attorney wasted no breath on theatrics, launching instead into a counterargument that sought to dismantle the prosecution's carefully constructed tower by attacking its foundation, reminding the jury of inconsistencies in witness memories, the potential for bias in expert testimony, and the ever-present possibility of evidence misinterpretation in a case driven as much by public hysteria as by hard fact, his words flowing in a continuous stream that mixed sharp legal reasoning with quiet appeals to fairness and the presumption of innocence. And as he paced slowly before the jury box, he revisited key exhibits, holding them up not as proof of guilt but as symbols of how ISLE data can be shaped to fit a predetermined story, warning that to convict on such grounds would set a dangerous precedent where narrative outweighed certainty, his tone gaining intensity as he described the human cost of a wrongful verdict, the years of freedom at stake, the irreversible damage to a life that might one day be proven blameless. And as he spoke, even some of the prosecution's supporters found themselves shifting uneasily, aware that the weight of the decision lay heavy not only on the defendant but on the entire framework of justice itself. While outside the courthouse, the crowd swelled, their chants and placards captured by cameras broadcasting live to millions, each faction convinced of a different truth, their arguments echoing through the city streets and into living rooms around the world where families debated the case over dinner tables and late-night screens. And inside, the jury listened with rapt attention, their faces a mosaic of concentration and fatigue as they absorbed the final points, the judge occasionally interrupting to clarify a point of law or to remind counsel to keep arguments within the bounds of admissible evidence. Yet even these formalities could not fully contain the emotional weight of the moment, and when the defense at last rested and the judge delivered final instructions, the gravity of the decision settled upon the 12 jurors like a physical burden, each of them aware that their verdict would ripple far beyond the walls of the courtroom, influencing careers, reputations, and perhaps even future legislation. And as they filed out to begin deliberations, the room exhaled a collective breath, conversations breaking out in hushed tones as lawyers packed away their papers and journalists rushed to relay every detail to the waiting world, while the defendant remained seated for a long quiet moment, hands clasped tightly, gaze fixed on the empty jury box, as if trying to read in its stillness the direction of destiny. An hour after hour passed as the jury deliberated in a locked room, their debate reportedly intense and methodical, weighing each exhibit and testimony against the strict standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, voices rising and falling as some argued for conviction and others for acquittal, the deadlock breaking and reforming as new angles were considered and old assumptions challenged, until finally, as night settled over the city and the courthouse lights glowed against the dark sky, a signal was sent that a decision had been reached, drawing the crowd outside into a restless roar and summoning the judge, attorneys, and defendant back to their places for the moment that would define everything. And when the jury filed in, their expressions revealed nothing, a disciplined blankness that deepened the tension until the foreperson rose, holding the folded verdict slip in trembling hands, and the clerk read the words aloud to a room frozen in breathless silence, the echo of each syllable carrying the full weight of months of conflict, accusation, and defense, a single declaration that would forever alter the lives of all who had walked through those heavy courthouse doors. The verdict landed like a thunderclap inside the packed courtroom, a single word that seemed to vibrate through the marble walls and down into the bones of everyone present, and for a heartbeat the room held still, as if no one could quite process what they had just heard. Then an eruption of gasps, shouts, and muffled cries broke the silence, reporters scrambling to transmit the outcome while cameras flashed in a frantic stick, and the defendant remained frozen in place, eyes locked on the jurors who avoided any direct glance, their faces carefully neutral as the judge called for order and threatened to clear the gallery if the uproar continued. Yet the sound of collective shock refused to fade, spilling like a living force into the corridors and down the courthouse steps where crowds surged forward in a mixture of triumph and outrage. And inside, the lead prosecutor stood motionless for a beat before slowly lowering her head, the corners of her mouth tightening as though she were suppressing a surge of emotion that could not be expressed within the decorum of the court, while the defense attorney released a breath that seemed to carry months of relentless pressure, his shoulders sagging before he turned to place a steadying hand on his client's back, murmuring words lost beneath the din. And as the judge completed the formalities of sentencing and post-trial procedure, the defendant finally moved, rising with a deliberate calm that belied the storm in their eyes, a glint of gratitude for their counsel, and a wary glance toward the prosecution that held neither triumph nor apology. only a quiet acknowledgement of the strange intimacy forged through weeks of adversarial combat. And when the gavel fell to mark the official conclusion, the room began to fracture into clusters of conversation and hurried exits. Family members pushing through to embrace the defendant with tears and whispered reassurances, while journalists swarmed the attorneys for statements, each outlet desperate to frame the narrative first. And outside the courthouse, the scene exploded into a chaotic theater of chants, camera lights, and impromptu speeches from supporters and critics alike, some celebrating what they called a victory for justice, while others condemned it as a miscarriage that would embolden wrongdoing, their voices blending into a deafening chorus that echoed off the city buildings and carried through the humid night air. And as the defendant finally emerged, flanked by security and legal aides, the crowd surged forward, microphones thrust toward their face as questions flew. What did the verdict mean? How did they feel? What would happen next? Yet the defendant offered only a brief, measured statement, thanking their team, expressing cautious relief, and reminding the public that the struggle for truth and fairness extended far beyond any single case. Their words delivered with a composure that left both supporters and critics momentarily disarmed. And then they were ushered into a waiting vehicle that eased through the throng while camera flashes traced its departure like lightning, leaving behind a city still crackling with debate and a public already splitting into factions of interpretation, each convinced that the outcome confirmed their deepest beliefs about justice, power, and the fragile line between guilt and innocence. And as night deepened and the courthouse lights dimmed, the echoes of the day lingered in countless conversations across kitchens, bars, and online forums where strangers argued into the early hours, each retelling of the trial, reshaping the story, turning evidence into myth and verdict into symbol, ensuring that long after the courtroom had emptied the case would live on as a contested landmark in the restless theater of public opinion. By dawn, the courthouse steps were littered with discarded placards and coffee cups, but the storm of speculation only grew stronger as news networks looped the footage of the verdict alongside interviews with legal analysts, former jurors from similar cases, and distant relatives eager to claim insight into the defendant's state of mind. And while the official record had closed with the gavel's final strike, the unofficial trial now unfolded across television studios, podcasts, and social feeds where every pause in testimony and every flicker of expression was dissected for hidden meaning. And inside a quiet hotel suite, several blocks away, the defendants sat with their closest allies, the curtains drawn against the pale morning light as they sifted through the avalanche of messages, some congratulatory and heartfelt, others threatening or bitterly accusing. The sheer volume a reminder that the verdict had transformed them from an individual into a symbol onto which millions projected their own fears and hopes. And though exhaustion hung heavy in the room, no one dared speak of rest because the next phase, the civil suits, the book offers, the inevitable documentaries had already begun to take shape, a relentless machine that fed on every unanswered question and every ambiguous gesture. And as the defense attorney reviewed a stack of fresh legal notices, the defendant wandered to the window and peered through the narrow gap in the curtains at the city below, the streets wet with last night's rain and alive with the restless energy of a public that would not let the story end. Their reflection faint in the glass, eyes shadowed by fatigue, yet lit by a strange flicker of determination that suggested this was not merely survival but the beginning of a calculated reclamation, a quiet vow that the narrative would not be left to others. And across town the lead prosecutor faced her own uneasy dawn, the sting of defeat tempered by a flood of messages praising her tenacity and urging her to appeal, her office phone already ringing with requests for comment and talk show appearances, even as she wrestled with the gnawing doubt that some overlooked thread of evidence might have changed everything. And in the homes of jurors who had spent the night replaying every argument and exhibit the weight of their decision, lingered like a persistent ache, some waking with a fragile sense of relief, others haunted by the possibility of having set loose a guilty party or condemned an innocent one to the harsh judgment of public opinion. And as the sun climbed higher over the city, painting the skyline in gold, the case shifted from legal drama to cultural phenomenon, a story retold in countless variations at breakfast tables, subway platforms, and workplace corridors, each retelling sharpening or softening the edges of fact until the line between truth and interpretation blurred beyond recognition, ensuring that even as official records hardened into history, the real verdict would remain forever contested in the restless court of collective memory. By the second day after the verdict, the city had settled into a deceptive calm that masked the fever of speculation running through its veins. News vans still circling the courthouse while talk shows replayed the trial's most explosive exchanges with breathless commentary, and the defendant, now shielded by private security, moved through a maze of back entrances and service corridors to avoid the relentless pursuit of cameras. Each quiet step punctuated by the knowledge that anonymity was gone forever, their name now shorthand for a debate that stretched far beyond the facts of the case. And in the defendant's hotel suite, the atmosphere hovered between relief and strategic planning as advisors sketched out possible futures on whiteboards crowded with arrows and timelines, discussing book deals, exclusive interviews, and carefully chosen public appearances that might shift the narrative from accused to survivor, from courtroom spectacle to redemption arc, while the defense attorney counseled restraint, reminding everyone that any careless statement could invite fresh legal trouble in the civil suits already brewing, his voice calm but edged with the fatigue of months spent balancing law and media frenzy. And across town the prosecutor faced a different storm, her office inundated with letters of both praise and condemnation, some urging an appeal while others accused her of persecuting an innocent person for personal ambition, the conflicting responses feeding a restless energy that kept her awake through the small hours, replaying key moments of the trial in a loop of what-ifs that offered no resolution. And meanwhile, the jurors, released back into ordinary life, found themselves approached in grocery stores and gas stations by strangers hungry for inside details, each encounter a reminder that their brief role in the drama had altered their own anonymity. And in the wider world, the case continued to mutate across social media, memes and think pieces colliding in an endless feed where supporters and critics waged digital war, hashtags rising and falling like tides as new rumors sparked fresh waves of outrage. And through it all, the defendant watched from behind drawn curtains, absorbing every headline and broadcast with a mixture of wariness and calculation, aware that public opinion was both volatile and powerful, that the same collective energy which had once threatened to destroy them could now, if carefully guided, become the force that secured their future. And as midnight approached on the second day, a small team gathered around a glowing laptop in the suite's dimly lit living room, drafting a measured statement to be released at dawn, words chosen with surgical precision to acknowledge the pain of the past months, to thank supporters for their unwavering faith, and to hint at a larger story yet to be told, a narrative that promised closure while leaving just enough mystery to keep the world watching. On the third morning, the carefully worded statement went live across every major platform. At the exact moment, the city stirred awake, a seamless release timed to capture both early commuters and the late-night global audience still dissecting the trial. And within minutes, the message spread like wildfire, shared, quoted, and debated in every corner of the internet, its tone calm yet defiant, offering gratitude to those who had believed in justice while pointedly reminding detractors that the verdict had been delivered by 12 impartial citizens, a subtle but unmistakable challenge to anyone still claiming the outcome was a fluke. And as networks interrupted regular programming to read the statement aloud, analysts scrambled to parse every phrase for hidden meaning, some praising its restraint and dignity while others warned that it signaled a calculated pivot toward a broader campaign of image rehabilitation. And inside the hotel suite, the defendant sat silences set this entire drama in motion. The answers may not come tonight, but the tension in the air tells us that the final chapter has yet to be written, and this is where you come in. Your voice matters in shaping the next wave of this story. Did the DNA results convince you beyond doubt, or do you believe there is still more truth hiding behind the cameras? Do you stand with Rashida as she faces the hardest decision of her life, or do you believe Kirk deserves a chance to prove his loyalty one last time? Scroll down right now and tell us exactly what you think. Like this video if you felt every twist and turn in your own chest. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single update, because you can be sure new revelations are already forming behind the scenes. Hit that notification bell so you are the first to hear when the next leak breaks and the next confrontation unfolds. Your comments, your reactions, and your theories are the heartbeat of this community. And together we will follow every clue until the truth finally stands in the open. This is more than a story about a celebrity couple. It is a lesson in trust, a test of loyalty, and a reminder that the secrets we hide can explode in ways no one sees coming. Stay alert, stay curious, and stay with us as we continue to uncover the pieces of a mystery that refuses to stay buried.